Hello human. In this video we're going to have a look at MIDI and CC capabilities of the model samples by Elektron. In this project I've just arranged a few little beats and hooked up Posion 202 synth on the iPad. It's a pretty cool synth. So how to set this up? First of all, let's have a look at the settings on the model samples. In this instance I've used track 6 for MIDI. First of all, let's have a look at how to actually have it trigger, like send out any MIDI, because on this device you can use all the 6 tracks, both as audio tracks and as MIDI tracks, and even at the same time as well, although it might not always make sense. For starters, we'll hit function track while we have our track 6 selected, and make sure that we roll down to mount and enable that. So disable, enable, cool. We can even set the root key. Nice. Then go to MIDI menu. In MIDI we go to sync, and here we have clock, internal clock. I've enabled that and everything else is disabled. Since I'm using this iOS synth, because I don't really have any outboard gear at the moment, I don't have proper hardware synths, but this should work similarly. So it does have a MIDI, I suppose a mini jack MIDI out, but I'm just using the MIDI over USB feature. So in essence, there is the USB cable runs into a Apple camera connection kit that connects to the iPad. So in the settings, we have the output set to USB. Encoders are set to internal plus external. And now for the next step, which is we actually got to map our synth to listen to the MIDI channel that we are at. So in this instance, I'm using the Posion 202. It's a pretty awesome synthesizer. We just go to settings, MIDI. Well, first of all, you might get some latency issues. So to fix that, you might have to experiment with the buffer size. 128 or just optimal tends to do the trick. In MIDI settings, we would obviously pick our device here, which is Elektron model samples. And virtual MIDI in doesn't really do any difference. And we're using MIDI channel 6 because obviously we can change this to whatever. But I figured I'd rather have those 5 for my audio tracks and use the last one for MIDI. That's it for the setup. I mean, you can just do whatever patch. I mean, this should really work with any device, soft synth or otherwise. Also, what's pretty cool about Posion 202 is that it has a MIDI learn feature. So this means that, we can triple tap on any knob, then twist our knob on the model samples, and it has basically learned it. So now we can essentially control the synthesizer with our knobs, so something like this. You get the idea. So the cool thing is that now we don't have to fiddle around with touch. We can actually use physical knobs to control our synthesizer. I mean, this is probably super useful if you're using like an iOS synth or whatever. Obviously, if you have a proper hardware synthesizer, you would have more often than not knobs on that. But obviously here it can be a bit fiddly to use the touch. I mean, you do have control. I mean, This thing has actually dialed the controls in really nicely. A knob is a knob is a knob. It's just more tactile, more sort of hands-on. So once again, if some of this stuff doesn't really work out for you in first time around, don't get frustrated. Just what's really important though, what's really cool here, right, is that since the model samples doesn't have an audio input, it can run the audio from the synth back in via the USB. So in other words, the model sample sends MIDI signals to the iPad, and that sends the audio straight back via the same old USB cable to the MIDI model samples. And that's pretty neat. So if you notice, there is no audio jack coming out of here. And yet we get, and actually I'm using the Digitakt as an audio interface because I don't have a dedicated audio interface right now. So that's what we have. And for some reason, I've not been able to set it up in this particular configuration to record stereo input. So we basically get dual mono, which is why this whole thing is in mono. So my apologies for that in advance, but yeah, probably I'll sort it out somehow. I just wanted to share with you this like how this works. Oh, and one more important thing. We don't have CC per se, like I cannot set up all my CCs corresponding to the 202 synth here. What it can do is, let's go to a different pattern, just cause. Okay, so now we have a fresh pattern. Yeah, so in terms of CC, right, what we have here. We can go to, if we hit function pad menu, then we can set whatever parameter, tie that to velocity, so that our velocity value will influence, for example, cutoff filter, which I think is kind of useful. So since I've mapped the MIDI to the Posion 202 in the Posion 202, I am not sure this would be working in this instance, but otherwise it would. Honestly, I've tried it, it does work. So how it would work is that like we go and edit our respective velocity to different kind of values throughout the sequence. If we get to set this up right, then the different values in velocity would enable us to sort of pattern lock the filter cutoff frequency, which is otherwise not really possible without proper CC. Like I cannot just automate, different cutoff values per step. Before I mapped the controls, like, the cutoff filter to this knob and so forth, it did actually work with the velocity values to modulate cutoff. Still, at least we can adjust the length of every step. That still works. I hope you find it useful. I know it's a pretty kind of basic technique, but I was actually kind of shocked about the ability to control, an iOS synth hands-on with the model samples knobs, and it just works like a charm. It's really, really handy. Obviously we do sacrifice one audio channel. There's probably a way to like trigger some hi-hats without affecting the pitch, and then sending the MIDI to an external synth at the same time. If you want to set this up with your Ableton Live, Logic, Cubase, your DAW, this works quite the same. You would just have to select what MIDI channel, what MIDI channel your synth is listening to in your DAW, and that should be the same number as you're using on your model samples. So track 6 in this case, or whatever you choose, and that should work just the same. Not much difference there. So hope you found that useful. It really does expand the capability of this box a lot. Also, there is an app called Aum, like Aum, AUM mixer, which enables you to run multiple synths, but obviously each of them will require a different MIDI channel. So you will run out of MIDI channels at some point, but that would enable you to control anything. So like you could send MIDI to a bunch of synths and send all the audio back and even route it in between them and whatnot, and then send it back via USB to your DAW or to your monitors, whatever is your game. If it's live setup or studio setup or whatever, maybe we'll cover that next time. But for now, just give it a shot. Check out the settings, set up your MIDI. If you probably have an Android or iPhone or whatever, and there is more than likely some sort of synthesizer app. Maybe even you have like a Korg Volca or even something bigger, and try and set that up. It's definitely doable, and it works pretty well. But obviously, if your synth doesn't have audio over USB, then you would probably need either an audio interface or a mixer or something, because, well, obviously the Model Samples does not have audio inputs apart from the USB. That's it for now. So thanks for watching. If you find this useful, remember to hit like and subscribe, hit the little bell to get notified when there are new videos like this, jams, tutorials, mixes, all kinds of stuff related to, electronic music making and stuff. And I'll see you in the next one.